Hello there, you freedom-loving awakening wonder. Thanks for joining me today for Stay Free with Russell Brand. How we appreciate your loyalty, your fealty, your ability to see past deception and towards truth. And that's exactly what we're covering today. We're looking at Canada. Has Canada set itself up as some sort of dystopic authoritarian nightmare where academics are punished and penalised, where clerics are flung in jail, where protesters are demonetised? What's going on under the auspices of democracy, under the admittedly fantastic coiffured hair of Justin Trudeau? We're looking at that in detail. We're going to be speaking to Stella Assange, activist and wife of Julian, who knows a thing or two about freedom and incarceration. She's just been to see Julian, and we'll be talking today about the possibility of Julian being released and what it means when a man is incarcerated, jailed, without trial, without conviction. What does it mean for justice? What does it mean about the principles themselves? Are there any principles at all? Now, we need you to follow us on Rumble. That's how we plan to survive, thrive, and move forwards. Like and subscribe to our channel there, and press the red awaken button to join our locals community and to support us directly if that's something that's within your means. If not, your presence is so much more valuable than your money. I can't tell you how much we value you. Lindsey Graham has been sending messages to Trump, essentially a pro-war message. The war between Ukraine and Russia continues to escalate. People continue to die. Peace is still not permitted to even be discussed. And Graham has a message for Donald Trump, who curiously, extraordinarily, is the only significant political figure advocating for peace. Just wrap your head around that now, that Trump is the lone voice advocating for peace, and he's perhaps the most vilified figure on the planet. Let's have a look at Lindsey Graham offering a curse to Trump.
Have you asked Donald Trump, your friend, to come out and publicly support more aid to Ukraine and to push some of these skeptical members of the Republican conference?
I'll leave it up to him to what to do, but he wanted to get out of Afghanistan.
Well, Vladimir Putin has been praising him for his comments about Russia and Ukraine.
Here's what I'll say about President Trump. He did not pull the plug on Afghanistan, even though he wanted to. The biggest mistake we made since the war on terror is withdrawing from Afghanistan. To President Trump and anybody else, if we pull the plug on Ukraine, that's 10 times worse than Afghanistan. There goes Taiwan. To stop funding Ukraine is a death sentence for Taiwan. Putin will keep going. You missed all of World War II if you don't know how this movie ends. To the Republicans who say Ukraine doesn't matter to us, you're wrong. Respectfully, you're wrong. The war gets bigger, not smaller. There goes Taiwan.
Well, it's a terrifying, mad prediction. There it goes, Taiwan. Taiwan will be next. That's 10 Afghanistans. I'll give you 10 Afghanistans for the price of a Ukraine. Terrible, terrible auctioneer Lindsey Graham is. And do you see how we're sort of gridlocked into perpetual war? It's the worst thing since the War of Terror. So it was a mistake to get into the War of Terror, but the Afghanistan war is sort of part of that ongoing hellish narrative, and there's no way out of it. Let's see who else has been addressing Donald Trump. You may have already seen this. Chris Christie is not a man who should be trying to come up with catchphrases and nicknames. He don't have that ability.
In Washington, D.C. also. And Donald Trump should be here to answer for that, but he's not. And I want to look at that camera right now and tell you, Donald, I know you're watching. You can't help yourself. I know you're watching, okay? And you're not here tonight, not because of polls and not because of your indictments. You're not here tonight because you're afraid of being on the stage and defending your record. You're ducking these things. And let me tell you what's going to happen. You keep doing that, no one up here is going to call you Donald Trump anymore. We're going to call you Donald Duck.
All right. I'd say that's a lot of pipe. There was a lot of exposition required to get there. Okay, I'm going to do this down the camera. Now, wait, you're not here, not because you're not, well, it's not because of the indictments, but, and also it's not because of the polls, so you are ducking, okay, therefore I'm going to call you, wait for it, and all the while you're thinking, this isn't going to be Donald Duck, is it? It's not going to be, like, we've almost sort of forgotten that Donald Duck and Donald Trump have the same name, because it's too glaringly obvious. It's too much in our face as a reference to warrant being comedic comedically utilised. But Chris Christie there, he's given it a bloody good go. And so to Kamala Harris. I get no joy from criticising high-profile political figures. My belief is that as we continue to awaken, as we continue to access the depths of our being, as we see plainly that these systems are incapable of delivering anything other than hypocrisy and corruption, they appear to get worse, whether it's dear old cadaverous Joe Biden, who's in a plain state of atrophy, or Kamala Harris, who's meant to be the safety net in the event that dear Joe Biden inevitably tumbles. She appears to be worse than him, using metaphorical systems and rhetorical devices that don't make sense in any language, although I'm not actually qualified to say because I only speak this one. So let me know if there is another language in which this makes sense. Let me know in the chat and the comments. Remember, we're going to be on these platforms just for a while, but then you'll have to click the link in the description to support us, to support free speech, to support freedom more broadly. Let's have a look at what Kamala Harris is saying.
You know that old story about the two frogs in the pots of water? Okay, so here, you're a good storyteller. I'm going to tell you a quick story. So 2 frogs and 2 pots of water. So in one pot of water.
Firstly, this is not an old story. It's an apocryphal tale. I think where Kamala Harris is going is that frogs don't notice that the temperature is gradually increasing till ultimately they're at boiling point. I think that's what it is. But I don't think there are 2 separate pots of water. And it's not like sort of a folky tale that's told to kids. It's like just an odd way of illustrating the idea that you don't notice incremental change. And it's not true and it's not real. But already I'm confused by it.
You drop the frog in, and you slowly turn up the heat. And that frog will be like, oh, it's getting a little warm in here. And then that water starts to boil, and that frog perishes. In the other pot of water, you turn up the heat to the point it's boiling. You drop the frog in it, it'll jump right out. Let's not be that first frog.
No, let's not be that first frog. Could there be a more inspiring message as your fuel bills soar, as your food bills become unmanageable, as your country falls apart before your very eyes, as sacred principles just fall away to leave nihilism and a kind of moral morass and an empty hollowness, a facade? Let's just remember that our way through this is just don't be that first frog. That's what I will say in this situation. Kamala Harris sometimes seems to defy description, but people had a go at it with one of those word clouds. Let's have a look at how they described her. Variety of words that were used. Useless, strong, idiot, incompetent, horrible, worthless. Oh my God. Some of it's actually a bit unkind, clueless, unsure, puppet, lovely, Democrat, cop, meh, pathetic woman. Them word clouds bring out some extraordinary reactions. And so now we go to another extraordinary emergent facet of authoritarianism. This phenomena, I believe, is perhaps the most important thing happening on the world stage right now. Liberalism, safety, security, and kindness are being presented to us as a way towards a progression in society, a better and more evolved society. But when you actually look at the legislation that accompanies the rhetoric around helping people and supporting one another, you will note that often it seems to benefit elite establishments and penalise ordinary people. And that could be no more obvious, yea, Lord, the very gods themselves come out in support of us, than in this extraordinary story where a Calgary pastor was sentenced to 60 days in jail for his role in protest against COVID-19 public health measures. If you ever want to question whether you're on the right side, have a look at a pastor being arrested by masked men and flung in jail for simply following his religious beliefs and standing with his community. Here's the news? No, here's the effing news.
Thank you for choosing Fox News.
No, here's the fucking news.
Trudeau's Liberal Canada jail a pastor for giving a speech at a blockade while celebrating actual Nazis and calling non-Nazis Nazis. Yay, Canada? Plainly, truth is coming out. Plainly, new revelations are being made. Plainly, we are at some sort of biblical apocalyptic time where pastors are put in prison by the Canadian government and neo-Nazis, well, not neo-Nazis actually, original Nazis are celebrated literally in Canadian Parliament. So, where is the truth? Where is the justice? Can you trust the system? Let's get into it. And isn't it curious how those that claim to be representing people that are suffering, the vulnerable, are appear to be the most authoritarian, dictatorial, deceptive and deceitful of them all. Let's look at this story in Canada and see if it can be applied to other global situations that we're experiencing. Remember, we need you to follow us now. That's how you do it. There's the details. And if you can support us, we need your support. And I can't promise your bank account won't be frozen. I wish I could. If you're in Canada, it probably will be. Let's get into this story.
Calgary pastor Artur Pawlowski has been sentenced to 60 days in jail.
Nothing like a pastor being arrested in the middle of the road by policemen wearing masks to tell you that democracy and the system are thoroughly healthy.
For his role in protests against COVID-19 public health measures. Pawlowski was found guilty of mischief and breaching a release order.
Mischief? And that like what Bart Simpson and Dennis the Menace and adorable scamps throughout time have done.
No vulgarity, no mischief, no politics.
This is for the spirit of play, for questioning the difference between right and wrong, and for standing up for what you believe in. 20 years. This is the key, by the way.
Back in May, in connection to the demonstrations, which blocked Alberta's main Canada-U.S. border crossing at Coots. During the trial, prosecutors said Pawlowski's impassioned speech.
How dare you? How dare you use passion? This is Canada. Oh, sorry. Let me neuter that right down.
Pawlowski's impassioned speech to truckers fanned the flames of unrest and convinced them to stay longer.
We're at a curious point, aren't we, where now, a few years down the line, it seems that many of the questions around coronavirus and the way that it was handled, particularly by authoritative and, I would say, proactive or interventionist governments, is up for inquiry. Did lockdowns work? Did masks work? How effective were vaccines? These are all just questions that you might, if you're not in Canada, think about in the privacy of your own home for now. Because it looks like what the Canadians are actually looking to introduce is sort of thought crime laws. Like, don't think a boot that. Sorry for the cheap boot joke, but, you know, it is Canada, and I'm not there at the moment, so.
I always said to the government officials, leave me alone. Please leave me alone. Let me do what I'm good at, which is feeding the poor, preaching the gospel, and just being a church.
Preaching the gospel? Feeding the poor and going to church? There's that key.
You don't have to come and listen to me. However, let me do my job. And that's what I did in the past 3 years. I did my job. I am a shepherd. I stood by hurting people. I did my best. You don't have to like it.
You actually do have to like it. It's a new law. It's now the law in Canada that you have to like it. What an extraordinary situation where someone who dedicates their lives to spirituality, to truth, to the exploration of meaning, to supporting a community, standing up for their own rights. And remember, we now know that on average, Canadian truckers were more vaccinated than the average Canadian population member per capita. You know, there's data on that. You know, follow the science, as they say. So we know that it's not that they were particularly anti-vaccine, they were just particularly pro-freedom. Now, one of the macro arguments we are making to you on our channel right now is that ideas around safety and convenience and security are being mobilized to shut down your liberty. That what was once regarded as the ordinary right of the average citizen is become like privacy or private belief. All these things, they're going fast. The ability to communicate, the ability to question, all of these things are being shut down radically. I'm almost glad of a situation where street preachers are being banged up in Canadian nick. 60 days that dude got, and they wanted him to have 10 months. They wanted him to have 10 months. And just bear in mind that this is taking place in the same sort of time frame as a Nazi being applauded in Parliament. You might think, oh, that was just a spurious error. No, it wasn't. They are so keen to live in a projected reality that actual reality doesn't matter. There is a conjured media maelstrom of reality, then there is actual reality. That is why we have to find a deep connection within ourselves to a kind of absolute truth, to absolute values, to absolute principles, because they ain't got any.
Back in May, Pawlowski was found guilty of mischief and breaching a release order.
I can't get past that mischief. Is it like, that's a crime now? I mean, like, when is all this laws being introduced?
We've had quite enough of your evil mischief.
Mischief, skullduggery, tomfoolery, and hijinks. 20 years.
Bart, the record of your mischief is staggering.
Prosecutors said to the court that Pawlowski's speech at the border...
I wouldn't have your hand up at that angle. If I were you when giving a speech, mate, you might get all of Parliament applauding you.
...convinced the protesters to stay longer and to, quote, hold the line.
Like I said, I should never be arrested. I should never be charged with an offense.
Martin Luther King was a preacher. Malcolm X was essentially a sort of imam. People that have strong religious conviction will apply their religious conviction to social situations because they've not been individualised, materialised, brought low, reduced, told there's no hope and there's no way, because this person's a man of God and sees spirituality as being more valuable than sort of the set of values that a culture just comes up with off the top of his head and then makes the actual law. These people like you, people like me, that have actual values, that believe in redemption, salvation, believe in change, believe in changing the system, believe in changing the self, believe in moving forward, believe in beauty and grace and truth, they are a threat. You are a threat. Your freedom is their problem. Plainly, look.
I was there in the capacity of a pastor.
For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Let's have a look, though, at what else is going on in Canada, just to make sure that the imprisonment of a pastor isn't some anomalous outlier. We first became interested in what was going on in Canada because, in spite of his appearances and, let's face it, lovely haircut, Justin Trudeau doesn't appear to be that interested in freedom, the rhetoric of freedom. Yes, but the sort of authoritarianism and emergency law-evoking kind of capacities of people that are more traditionally associated with tyranny. But tyranny in Canada is not always bad, even the worst example of tyranny in human history. The Nazis. Last week, the Canadian House of Commons Speaker Anthony Rota invited a 98-year-old man named Yaroslav Hunka to attend a speech by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Rota called Hunka a Canadian hero, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau cheered for Hunka alongside lawmakers. They were willing to do that just because they just didn't understand the facts and they hadn't looked into them properly. In a spiritually evolved society, the possibility of redemption and absolution for a Nazi would be something you consider. If you read, for example, Viktor Frankl's seminal work on his experiences in concentration camps, Man and His Search for Meaning, then you'd be aware that the travesty and murders and genocide of the Second World War oddly provided an opportunity for change. But that's not the culture that's being evoked or invited in Canada, a culture of like where we really try to understand reality, morality, truth, spirituality. What they want is just to mobilise and utilise particular narratives that can legitimise authoritarianism and control. You'll never see them advocating for a story where it's like, oh yes, I suppose actually we should just let people do what they want, and why don't we give people a vote on whether they want that or not, and maybe for the next, if there's going to be another lockdown, people can vote on it, and maybe we can let the truckers decide. You know, they're never going to come to those conclusions. It's always going to be, you know, that pastor, put him in prison, because that is control. Control. Bear it in mind, learn to observe, learn to watch. I know that you're doing it because I read the comments, I read the chat. I know that you're further along than me, many of you. Let's ensure that we keep doing that together, eh? In response, Rota took full responsibility for the incident and Trudeau called it deeply embarrassing. Trudeau then warned against Russian propaganda and Russian disinformation, because he's just saying stuff now. Yeah, you know, we applauded some Nazis because of Russian disinformation, actually. Is it not Canadian disinformation to celebrate a Nazi? You could say that. Are you Russian? Trudeau's non-apology and dismissal of criticism as Russian disinformation is especially hypocritical given his repeated denunciation of the Canadian Freedom Convoy as a Nazi-linked movement. Because the truckers' grievances were legitimate, and over the years seem increasingly legitimate, and because the actions against them were pretty draconian and extreme, emergency laws, freezing bank accounts, not allowing people to fund them, throwing people in prison that gave speeches, you have to find a way to legitimise that. You have to reverse engineer it. What would make it legitimate to do that? If they were Nazis? Yeah, but they're... Oh, if they were Nazis. Yeah. Anyway, we've got this guy over from Ukraine. You're all going to love. Hooray! What did he do in the war again? I don't know, but apparently he got a lot done. Hooray! About the truckers, Trudeau said, we are seeing activity that is a threat to our democracy. It's a threat to your democracy. Your democracy is not a democracy. And it's undermining the public's trust in our institutions. Quite rightly. Trudeau, one day later, compared the truckers to Nazis and American racial segregationists. It's so disgusting, isn't it? Like, what the hell does it have to do with racial ideology, the freedom of movement, the rights for workers to unite? How is that even connected? Isn't it more likely, here's a hypothesis, that it's got nothing to do with that, and they retrospectively apply that in order to disempower that movement? What do you think's more likely, looking at the facts? Conservative Party members can stand with people who wave swastikas, he said. They can stand with people who wave the Confederate flag. I prefer to just out and out applaud Nazis. Bring them in from the cold and clap at them up in a gallery. Straight for it. Not their signs or their monikers, the Nazis themselves. It should not have to be said, but it does. Trudeau had zero evidence then, and none today, that the truckers were racist or Nazis. Zero evidence. The swastikas printed on flags at the convoy were not hate symbols. They were intended as criticism of the government's overreach for a comparison to Nazi Germany. Yet Trudeau condemned a Jewish member of parliament for being sympathetic to the convoy and for supporting people who wave swastikas. Trudeau's colleagues participated in his conspiracy theory. One Liberal MP said that truckers' honk honk slogan was a coded message for Heil Hitler. There was never any evidence for this then or now. Isn't it more likely that at a trucker protest, where there's likely to be trucks and you're on a road and people have got horns, that it might mean honk your horn in support of the truckers? That well-established form of showing solidarity. But I suppose that's not Nazi enough, is it? So if we could just, Hail Hitler. Yes, we could undermine their entire campaign with this. And meanwhile, let's get this guy over from Ukraine. Good work. He was very busy. Apparently in the 30s and 40s, he got a lot done. As such, Trudeau was spreading disinformation. Naturally, Trudeau has for the last 3 years been accusing others of spreading disinformation and demanding that social media companies like Facebook and Twitter censor the people he disagrees with. The problem with you lot is you celebrate misinformation and you also celebrate Nazis. But what about you with that Nazi? That is Russian disinformation. Canada's political troubles may seem trivial and unimportant. The country is not a significant military power. It has fewer people than California. Its economy is the 9th in the world. California is the 4th. Trudeau has just been engaging in the usual progressive rhetoric of accusing his opponents of being Nazis, something both sides do, as the controversy over last Friday's applauding showed. But Trudeau is important, and what he's doing in Canada should terrify everyone in the Western world who cares about being free from government tyranny, censorship and disinformation. That's because Trudeau is pioneering a new way for governments to take control over the information environment, spreading disinformation and demanding censorship that is similar but different to efforts we're seeing in places like California, Australia and New Zealand. Former and current colonial powers appear to have relationships with some of the nations they helped to establish, i.e. the countries listed just then, where piloting ideas that would seem likely to engender resistance in countries like the United States or the UK, or seem more pronounced and more dangerous, appear to be able to be practiced there. Notice that during the coronavirus period, Australia set up, I think I'm right in saying, internment camps. Notice that Canada is very assertive and progressive with authoritarianism, with the disinformation being described in this article. It seems to me that because these countries, because of a shared tongue with significantly your country, the United States of America, are being used to normalise ideas and to introduce ideas that elsewise we might be reluctant to accept. Let me know if you agree with that. Let me know if you think that Canada, Australia, New Zealand, maybe even the UK to a degree, we're no longer a superpower, we're essentially ancillary to the United States of America, are being used to pilot ideas, normal ideas, so that they can become ubiquitous. Let me know in the chat and the comments if you agree with that. People across the Western world were rightly alarmed when Trudeau last year invoked for the first time in Canadian history the Emergency Measures Act and froze bank accounts of people who had simply donated to the truckers' cause. It was brazen thuggery that Trudeau justified by calling ordinary Canadians Nazis and racists. If you call someone a Nazi or a racist, whatever you do is permissible. It seems to me that's how this particular play works. Trudeau's crackdown on the Freedom Convoy protesters was followed by efforts to regulate and control the internet. His Online Streaming Act and Online News Act gave the government expansive new powers to regulate what happens and what you see online. So it's about control, isn't it? Like the online UK safety bill here in the UK. Do they want to protect you or do they want to control you? Do they want to help you or do they want to control the access to information that you receive? Just have a look and decide for yourself. You'll be able to work it out. Are there any global trends? Do there seem to be laws being passed all over the world? Does there seem to be a process of vilification, shutting down of dissent, shutting down of dissidents, vilifying people that disobey and stand up and oppose authority? You can observe all of that for yourself. You don't need me or anyone else to tell you. You let me know in the chat. The atmosphere created by Trudeau and his party is completely upending Canadian society, leading to the persecution of his detractors and limiting speech and expression. Earlier this month, a Liberal judge in Calgary sentenced a Christian pastor to 2 months in jail for what he said during a 20-minute speech to the Truckers' Freedom Convoy. We can't keep bringing you inspiring, groundbreaking, anti-authoritarian, anti-totalitarian content like we do without our partners and sponsors. And this week, once again, we've teamed up with, you guessed it, Mule to create this limited edition sticker pack. Look at these delicious stickers. There are 6 stunning designs, including this guy. They're only available in this pack, and they're all made with Mule's magic touch. Mule has 10,000 of these packs. That's right, 10,000. Ready to deliver to you absolutely free. Just go to stickermule.com/Russell and fill out the form. It's perfectly easy. stickermule.com/Russell, fill out a form, then you're just going to have some stickers, all right? And isn't that better than where you were prior to the arrival? Yes, it is better. And this is how we're able to continue to bring you radical content that challenges the system, like we're doing right now. Get over there, stickermule.com/Russell, fill out the form. Get on with it. Right. The College of Psychologists of Ontario recently ordered conservative psychologist Jordan Peterson to undergo social media training because they believed his tweets and opinions were problematic. An Ontario court then upheld the college's decision. So it began in academia, it began as a cultural phenomenon, and it's ended up in the judiciary. The judiciary imposing measures on Jordan Peterson. You have the right to agree with or disagree with Jordan Peterson. You know I have a friendship with Jordan Peterson. He's my friend. And I disagree with him, as I'm sure he disagrees with me on many issues. What I don't disagree with is his right to freely communicate and essentially have a set of values that seem to me to be based in pretty thorough research. And I've had arguments with Jordan Peterson about some of the matters where I disagree with him, and it seems that that's not actually affected our friendship. But what is clear is what's going on in Canada is anything but dull. It's terrifying. In looking to defend minorities and promote culture, Trudeau's Liberals are everything they once feared. They are authoritarian, anti-democratic and illiberal. I think what happens is inept politicians that are kind of like pop star poster boy politicians that kind of look nice or sort of seem appropriate are kind of groomed and ushered through the system, and they don't actually, this is my view, my personal view, understand politics that well, and they're able to be manipulated by people who understand things a lot better than they do. And they don't notice that all of a sudden they're saying things like, I admire China, yeah, we should shut down their bank accounts, yeah, let's invoke the Emergency Act, those truckers are Nazis, because they're not grounded in the kind of ideals that, for example, that pastor is, who's like, I'm willing to get arrested for what I believe in, I'm willing to die for what I believe in. Those kind of values, even that kind of mindset, having a community that you care about, having people that you love, having values and principles that go beyond materialism is being eroded because, well, you know why? Because we're living in sort of cellular, atomic little realities where the best we can hope for is just some sort of quick hit of purchase. We've been distracted and disconnected from God. And you have to wonder whether Jordan Peterson is a problem not because of his views on identity and identity politics, or because he has a deep reverence for meaning and passion and standing up for what you believe in. What do you think, based on what you're learning about Canada here, think is more of a threat to the Canadian system? Do you think it's like they're fretting all day, oh no, we really want to help people on their identity issues? Or do you think they want control? Because look at the legislation that's been introduced. What does it seem to be augured and directed towards? And what's happening in Canada is not separate from what's happening in the US, the UK, Europe and Brazil, but intimately connected to those nations. That's what globalism means. There is a kind of a global tide rising. There is authoritarianism, centralism. There are connections between laws in the countries just listed there that sort of don't make sense. Where are they coming from? Whose ideas are they? What happened during the pandemic? Where did those decisions get made? What happened in anomalous nations like Sweden that took a different path? Did they have a lot more deaths? Oh no, less deaths. This is extraordinary. Where do these edicts come from? If they're not grounded in data, in real verifiable facts, then it's an agenda, then it's an ideology, then it's globalism. According to Justin Trudeau and his Liberal Party supporters, he and their party are the party of compassion for vulnerable people, freedom and Canadian culture. Liberals care in their view, while Conservatives don't care. Trudeau has proclaimed his loyalty to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And when the Liberals introduced their social media reform legislation, they said the goal was to promote Canadian culture, ensure the sustainability of the news industry, and guarantee we heard from marginalised voices. But a government cannot claim to care about the vulnerable or about freedom while freezing the bank accounts of a single mother working a minimum wage job, as Trudeau's government did. Nor can the government claim to care about the vulnerable or freedom while trying to regulate the internet to prevent further protests and challenges to Trudeau's government. The main way Trudeau and the Liberal Party are trying to do this is by subsidising news media and punishing smaller media outlets. This is similar to what governments are doing all around the world. The government defends the crackdown on expression and speech by appealing to Canadians' innate sense of kindness. Our leaders tell us we must protect our culture, protect the vulnerable and care for our communities. They argue that limiting expression and criminalising dissent is a means to that end. But censorship has always been used to hurt and marginalise minorities and has never helped them. Rights were won for African Americans, gays and lesbians by ensuring they had the ability to express themselves freely. Trudeau's actions aren't about social progress, they're about power and control. Trudeau embodies many of the traits of left-wing authoritarians. All authoritarians support censorship and submission. They tend to believe this is necessary because in their minds the population is naive and cannot be trusted. Can there be a clearer marker of authoritarianism than the belief that the population are inferior to those that govern? I think for a long time we've sensed that that is the mindset. They think they're better than us. They think we can't run our own lives. They think our relationship with them is like a relationship with a parent who can dock your pay in the form of taxes and dock your freedom in form of censorship, and now in new, previously inconceivable ways, control your movement, control your ability to communicate, control your ability to participate in the technological public sphere. This no longer seems to me to be about kindness. I think we're going to have to check our value systems. What is the liberal left about? What is Justin Trudeau trying to achieve? If your real end was to help people, to protect vulnerable people, wouldn't there be more evidence of it? Wouldn't there be less and less globalist measures like curtailing freedom, freezing bank accounts, etc.? Wouldn't you see the promotion of open conversation, the promotion of freedom, and a good faith relationship with the population? Wouldn't you see the promotion of smaller media outlets and the diminishing of larger ones rather than the subsidization of larger ones, which is what's actually happening? Authoritarianism is predicated on this idea: you should not be allowed to control your own life. You don't know what you're doing. You need to be controlled, and they are going to control you. It's as simple as that. Trudeau constantly splits the population into liberal angels and conservative devils. You either believe in liberal climate policy or are a climate denier, according to Trudeau. You either mask up and vax up or are putting lives at risk. You either support the radical demands of trans activists or you hate sexual minorities. There is also something deeply antisocial about Trudeau's behaviours. To falsely accuse your opponents of Nazism and racism, to cut off the bank accounts of people who criticise you, these are cruel and callous behaviours. Few Canadians believe that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau meant to undermine democracy or stand with Nazis last Friday when his main Liberal Party ally led the House of Commons in applauding a former Nazi. But that's the whole point. Trudeau no more meant to undermine democracy or stand with Nazis than Canadian truckers meant to undermine democracy or stand with Nazis. And yet Trudeau accused them of precisely that. Few Canadians see either Trudeau or Canadian truckers as Nazis. What we need to change now is for more of us to get angry when we see our leaders label our fellow citizens as such. It seems that we live in a time where treasured and hard-won principles, such as justice, such as freedom of speech, such as innocent until proven guilty, are just being casually discarded, all in the name of kindness and safety and security. But if you see a pastor being arrested by masked police and put in prison with a claim that he ought to serve 10 months, when what he was actually doing was standing up for what he believed in, meanwhile Nazis are being applauded in Parliament, which, as this writer says, was obviously an error, you have to question how much you can trust this system. Are countries like Canada and Australia and even the UK being used to pilot a new form of authoritarianism? Authoritarianism not based on militarism, although militarism is always one of the ends and certainly where the money comes from, but a kind of totalitarianism that's based on helping others and protecting you from yourself. I believe it is. I believe that authoritarianism is based primarily on the idea that they know more than you, that you are not capable of running your own life, that if you defy them, if you dissent against them, you can be shut down, depersoned, and even imprisoned. And I believe we have to stand strongly against that together. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the chat. Keep chatting, baby. See you in a second.
Thank you for choosing Fox News.
No, here's the fucking news.
So, liberalism and freedom now apparently has the peculiar veneer of authoritarianism and looks like members of the clergy being flung in prison for standing up for their community. It increasingly looks like dissident voices are silenced in order to maintain centralized control. And on that note, what a fantastic guest I'm about to introduce. If you're watching us anywhere else, we're going to be exclusively available on Rumble now, so click the link in your description. And if it's within your means, please press the red button and become an awakened wonder to support us. We need your support now